going here to item 2, discussion of timeline and priorities of the racial justice proposals. Um, Before I move along, Kelly, did you want to introduce this at all, or I know Mitch has been been taking the lead on this. It's something that we're getting closer and closer to actually taking some action on, I believe, and tonight might be tonight.
Yeah, the only thing I will say is, I've sent out all of the information that several different staff members have put together. The last 2 things that I'm working on is the use of force numbers, and the numbers are in all of our reports from 2007 through 2019, but we're trying to put it in a spreadsheet so that it's more usable, since those reports are quite lengthy. And so the problem is the numbers or the categories changed over time. And so I'm going to share those with Mitch to figure out whether we just use the last 5 to 6 years or how the best way to report it is, because it just doesn't match up. And then the other one is the racial information in regards to arrests and tickets. And I'm putting the final numbers together on that. We have the numbers, but the way it's explained, I couldn't understand it myself. So we need to figure out exactly how to put those numbers to make it understandable.
Great. Thank you, Kelly.
I think the 2 things that I was hoping to maybe get done at this meeting was just to have, maybe somewhat of a quasi timeline for, I think you used the term, Mayor, low-hanging fruit, just so we get some things checked off. And then I think, as a lot of us have been out talking to folks, I think there is a communication gap that we've got to make sure we are letting people know what we're doing. So trying to figure out, have a special link or page off the website dedicated to like here's a progress monitoring of of the actionable steps we are taking, so that people have a quick 1-click stop to go to find out where things are at. So I don't think Ellen's on the call, but I'm sure it'd be her or Jen to maybe create that and produce something like that. The other thing too, Kevin, you are on the call. Just 2 quick questions for you. Are we correct then? Does the chokehold language, are we required to use the language that was passed by the legislature?
Well, I would use the language in there, but the police policies also are a lot of those policies are based on actual cases. So a lot of we have a organization that updates those as we go. So obviously I would use the language about that the state passed too, but there might be some more language that I think would be in there also, that some of that stuff has direct relationship to cases that have been decided. So I'm not an expert on use of force policy, but I can certainly talk to the chief about that to make sure but I would obviously reference what the state had passed.
Good.
I've been looking at the information that we received, and I had just some questions about the anti-bias training specifically, and again, how does the state's law impact what we do on that? And then I just was curious about just some of some clarifications on, or just maybe just some additional information on some of the trainings that officers have, and how like some of these are really great that are on the list. I just would be curious to know, like, how many officers have completed the LGBTQ trainings. The neurobiology of trauma, that's a fantastic training. I'd be curious to know how many have completed that. And then just, I would be curious about some specific information about, what is in the anti-bias training, how often is it completed, and how many officers have gone through that? Is that and is that a part of what they receive at the academy and things like that?
Yeah, I was a little confused on that too. Oh, go ahead. Someone going to say something? Yeah. Oh, just about if the trainings are on a rotational basis, or because it seems like there's some years where there's several being offered, some years where there's just one. And again, I'd like us to get to a point where, our trainings on de-escalation and bias are equal to that of other, use of force trainings and things like that, so that our officers are getting, equal amounts of training on two different ways to end situations. And, at some point too, just based on some of the comments that was put in, for example, on the eight reforms, I'm not sure. And Kelly, maybe you mean, and Shane should sit down and try to plan some things out. Maybe it will be good to have maybe Shane at a council work session, so that if there are like specific questions, he's available to respond to them. Because again, I think those 8 can't wait are kind of some low hanging fruit that we'd be able to check off pretty quickly to get some things done.
I'm going to argue with you. I think it's done. It's done. You got eight questions. They answered them. It's done.
Then we should formalize it into
80%, 80 to 90% of this town doesn't give a damn of what you are talking about. And they're fed up. Fed up, Mitch. And every time you start going into this thing and going into the weeds, you're the one that's responsible for it. And you are too, John, because you gave up your position. Well, right. I had someone that everybody knows tell me yesterday, we do not have a mayor anymore. And who the hell is Mitch Gross to run a project?
Well, we're all kind of delegating here, Tom.
No, you're not delegating. You're taking over, Mitch. You're taking over. And don't give me the quizzical look like you don't know what the hell you're doing.
Well, Tom, we hear you.
You hear me strong. You hear me loud, and you're going to hear it from more people too.
Okay.
I'm concerned about this police department, and every time you nickel and dime them, you're nickel and diming them, because you people have no knowledge whatsoever of what the police do. None. Go to the academy, then you can figure out what you're doing. We've had 30 years here. And just because of outside influences, you're nickel and diming our police department.
Tom, what do you mean?
I'm disappointed in you, John. I'm disappointed in you, John. You don't say boo.
Okay, Tom.
I would like to state that I found it very helpful to attend the Citizens Police Academy, which I mentioned before, and also reading our Coralville City police manual that we were given, the policy manual. And I just noticed that some of the questions that are being asked, if we were reading that manual and seeing the different areas, we would have a better perspective on what Coralville is doing as a police force. That would be my concern, that we take the time to look at that. I realize we need to hear from the community, but I think we need to be knowledgeable of what Coralville is.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate that, these are challenging conversations. They're important conversations. And I think it's very clear that, we do all appreciate what our officers do. I think one of the things that we need to really understand about this conversation is that it's not a one or the other thing. That we can acknowledge
You know that.
we can acknowledge that there have been inconsistencies in the way people of
What?
color are treated
What-
by police.
What inconsistencies?
No,
Name 'em.
okay.
Name 'em.
Let
What
Megan finish.
inconsistencies?
No, you are not going to talk to me that way.
I'm asking you, what inconsistencies? It's
No,
just one
you know
sheet.
what? Okay, you're gonna let me finish. You're gonna let me finish. We
Okay,
we
finish.
have a great department. We can be leaders in how we approach community policing. We can be leaders because we have a good department. They are conscientious. We can be an example. And I guess, you know, I get frustrated with the either or conversation, that if you want to examine the systemic inequities that exist, then you don't support law enforcement. And that argument happens because people don't want to talk about racism and systemic racism. And it's a way to shut down the conversation. I appreciate what the courage that Mitch and John and all of us, most of us, have in leaning into this conversation. The community is changing, and that is a good thing. And step up and be leaders in this conversation. And you're right, you know, there are a lot of things that our department does really well, but that doesn't mean that we can't look to be better and look to be an example.
You didn't answer. What inconsistencies? You said inconsistencies.
Well, you know, we have also heard a lot, because we have been talking to our citizens of color.
Anecdotal.
And
Anecdotal.
there are some things that I improved. You know, there are definitely some things that, and especially when we are talking and actively seeking out those voices that have not always been heard. I think most of our officers do a really great job at, but we have heard from some of our citizens of color that there are some improvements that could be made.
Bill, you have a comment?
Yeah. I would like to go in just a little different direction so we can de-escalate here just a smidge. I went back and looked at the list of items that the Iowa Freedom Riders put forth to Iowa City. And to be honest, except for when they wanted us to drop the curfew, I don't really believe any of them apply to us.
Right.
So what I think we could do first in regards to like the low-hanging fruit is to go ahead and say what we're doing well. And let's start with that, like 8 can't wait. That's already in our policies. Our police officers do that on a daily basis. We've got really cool statistics like they haven't shot at anybody for 30 years. Let's get that information out there to start with while we're working on some of this other stuff slowly with methodical thinking, weighing all of the pros and cons, and just kind of start with what we have.
Well, and I think that is a good place to start. And it kind of ties into a lot of the other things that we've been talking. Communication. Let's pull the things out that align with that list and make sure that we are sharing that with the public. Let's I love that idea, Mitch, of that you had about putting a page on the website that we can point to, that we can put those timelines on, that we can showcase those things that we already have, and then thinking about things that we want to, that we're going to continue to work on. I thought that was a really, really great idea.
Yeah, when I looked at the Gazette had on Sunday, they did a pretty cool feature where they took all the policy proposals of Marion, Cedar Rapids, and Iowa City and listed them. And when I looked at all three of those lists, the three that I saw that were ones that we had talked about were the banning of chokeholds, which is why I started this question about, what the state statute says, because obviously, I think there was a majority consensus to have that be our policy here. There is an interest in, from my conversations, of having the establishment of some type of citizen police review board, which was in all three of the other, those three municipalities are looking at that. And I think that's where we have to look at to see what are the, the statutory requirements with the citizen review or with the Civil Service Commission, as well as with the contract, which I have a question about that.
That's got Mitch, review board's got a history. Look into Iowa City's history.
That's why, right, Tom, and people have said Iowa City's doesn't work.
Iowa City's hasn't worked for a long time.
Absolutely, I agree with that 100%.
And
To be fair to Iowa City, Kevin and I reviewed that, and we reviewed the laws of civil service and collective bargaining. The reason that they are the only ones that have one and they have it written the way it is because of they're complying with the state law. And so that's the problem. And I just want to remind people of that because I've heard a lot of criticism of Iowa City and that commission. The problem is they wrote it the best that they could under the state law. And there's so many different provisions in that code that are impacting that. That's why you don't see them in Iowa, because to be writing an effective one that people would find more palatable than Iowa City's, you couldn't do under the current state law. And so, and that would be one I would suggest that maybe we could even spend one night at a work session just talking about that and the civil service laws, because Kevin put together a lot of really good information on that. And that would be, I think, a very good specific topic because I think Iowa City did the best that they could with the provisions that they had.
Kelly, that was one thing that I noticed in reading through the notes too, that is there's more to it than, again, what the perception is that they don't have much authority and all of that. And that I thought that the notes that we got were really helpful in explaining that it's why that, it's maybe a little bit of an unfair perception given that they're limited too in what they can do.
Yeah, and that's what I would think would be helpful to the general public as well as all of you for Kevin and I to go through that, because there's some very specific laws in Iowa in that regards. And we also reviewed the idea of whether we could make the Civil Service Commission stronger, which there's laws on that regards, and they're like the judge, if you will. How would you describe it, Kevin? I was trying to, they're supposed to be non-biased because that's they get the appeal.
Yeah, they get the
items.
It's sort of like the Board of Adjustment where they get to make the final say on an appealed matter. So you can't have them initiating and hearing complaints and then having to rule on the complaints later that they would. So I don't think, making the Civil Service Commission, sort of like the review board, that's I don't think that would work.
But that's an example. We should go through that in specific. We shouldn't do that tonight.
Well, if it's going to be, it sounds like if it's going to require state law, maybe involve Zach and Dave too. I mean, so they, if that's the avenue to go, just so they're aware, because there's no point of us going down a rabbit hole that we have no statutory power over.
I, after, it was very helpful reading the synopsis as well as our procedures, as well as chapter 400. But with that did lead me into researching civilian review boards and community policing and all those sort of things. So I have a whole list of questions that easily can be moved to another night.
I think as we've all said, I think there's a lot of this has already been answered. And I think something that's causing us to struggle is it's not structured. I think that I'm not quite sure who all is included with the we, but we should start putting together a report and trying to compile based on the information that the staff has given us on some of the discussions we've already had that we agree on, like the 8 items. And if they're in black and white in front of us, we could start adding some structure and checking it off and moving towards these ones that take more discussion. That's what I'd like to propose.
You're muted, Kelly.
2 things on that. Sorry about that. 2 things on that. One, if you could, any of you could get us as many questions as you have so we can research that information and get that. We'll get that back to all of you, no matter who asked it, we'll get that to everybody. And I think maybe the most effective thing is before the next meeting, Mitch and I could go through the list and the time and come up with the timeline and topics for each meeting and then get back to all of you to comment on. Because I think, for example, to me, the Review Board and Civil Service Commission, that's a very interesting discussion. And you all need to hear that because I think it's extremely interesting. And you're right, Mitch, that may be one, and once we come up with the list, we could get that to Dave and Zach, and if they wanted to, then they would know when different topics are being discussed as well. But Mayor, that would be a helpful thing for us to do so that we can get off the dime. And because there is a lot of different individual items that we could discuss and move on with.
I think structure is good at this point.
So I'll touch base with you, Kelly, and we'll find a time, maybe late this week and early next week. And I just want to say too that the profession of education is under constant scrutiny, and public schools, and there's no doubt there are systemic issues with public education. That doesn't mean necessarily that our school per se is wrought with this, but you can't also deny the fact that when we have to look at big structural things, you have to look at it through a local lens, and everything can always be better. And that's what the goal of this is to do, is to make our community better. It's not to stifle or to harangue. It's to make our community better. And I'm not, going to stop doing that.
And thank
Just
you.
like we cannot, just like we can't say overall Black people are all the same, we can't say police are all the same either. And
Right.
so when we put on those lenses, we need to be very open-minded about what our police department is thinking too, because I know, and I'm sure Mitch, as a teacher, if you read in the paper that they did some horrific thing to a child, then the whole profession is hit on. And I want to be very careful that we don't do that to our department as we go ahead and dig deep about implicit bias and things like that we can help other people understand without necessarily, condemning or accusing people of doing something. Because I think,
Absolutely, Jill. Thank you for saying that.
We're in a pretty good place. We have a really caring department. And I remember talking to Shane when we were doing the interviewing. I had a lot of questions what his philosophy was on this exact topic.
Right.
And he had great answers. So I just want to, as we're stepping into this, let's just all clear our mind and be open-minded about it from all perspectives. That's what our job is as the leaders of our community.
Well, and as I said, a month ago, and I will say this, I feel like as a council member, I have more interaction with the police than any of you with what I do for a living. And I've said our police officers hit home runs. They're a fantastic department. But like any profession, and the ones I've talked with, they want to have the any tarnish removed from the profession. Anybody who's in a profession would want that. And if there's things we can do to do that, we're going to do it.
I agree. I I would really like all of us to take some time to become familiar with the policy manual that the police have worked on for years and have at our disposal. We received, and it's pages and pages,
Right.
but still, if you at least know where you can look for a certain policy. Otherwise, I don't think we need to offend our police officers by not really knowing what they believe and what they're doing. I think this will make it a much um, swifter and much more effective discussion when we at least know where we're at with that. And then we can bring in all these other questions that we get from the community or the um, interactions and so on and match them up against that.
I appreciate you saying that, Lori. And I think, I think the use of force has been an issue that's been brought up quite a bit. And that actually starts page 35 of the report. And again, there's a lot of things in there that people aren't familiar with. For example, there's a whole section on the duty to intercede.
Yeah,
So if an officer
other police
sees-
officers.
Absolutely.
Right.
So those are just
Yeah.
things we need to publicize that we're doing. Absolutely. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, and these are challenging conversations, and it is not. It is a nuanced conversation. It is a difficult conversation. It is a necessary conversation, and I do want to reiterate that we have a lot. There's a lot going for us, and I think it's a real opportunity to be the best and to be an example. And I think we can do that. I really do.
Well, my only comment, we are an example. And every time you say something anecdotally, you better know what you're talking about.
Well, I would say that for you too.
Yes.
I would say the same thing for you.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you. And
Well-
Mitch, there are other people that do know police work. So, you're not the only one that is the most.
Well,
I
Tom,
mean,
I'm not claiming. to be-
I don't appreciate that. I am the all-knowing. I am the all-knowing gross. I know everything that's going on.
Well, I don't think I said.
So then
was-
share your knowledge with the rest of the council then.
I just did. I said the interactions I've had with our police have been outstanding and stellar.
Okay, I would, let's call this discussion to a close for tonight. I think we've got a plan to move ahead. I think that, one of the things I've always boasted about our council is it's been respectful and civil. We don't always agree, but it's been respectful and civil, and I would like to see that to continue and not go in a different direction. We will be better and stronger, and if we can work together and proceed. So, thank you. Okay. Kelly, shall we knock out number 3? Permitting of